دولية ومتنوعة.
مراسلون ومحللون.
برنامج عبد الرحمن حسين.
عادل الدلال.
ضيوف ومتحدثون
في السياسة والاقتصاد.
هي خطة استراتيجية فقط.
يعني لما تعصف باستقرار المملكة قبل أي دولة أخرى.
وجميعا شاركنا في هذه الحكومة دون
التكنيك لونكادرمون تاع الاغريكولتور يعني
كثير من المتعاملين الاقتصاديين استثمروا في ولاية بسكرة.
في الثقافة والرياضة.
وقع السينما في الجزائر، وقع التمويل.
القرآن قال لابد من الصحن على المستوى القضائي.
هذه السوسيال أنا كان في دارينية وكالجزائريين احنا ما نشيخش لي ميداي.
كانوا رايحين يعموا هذه الخطة.
كانت رايحة
صحيح. من الجزائر ومن العالم.
الدولية في قلب الأحداث.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed Attaf has arrived in Tripoli carrying a message of President Abdelmajid Tebboune to the President of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mohammed Yunus al-Manfi. And Energy and Mines Minister Mohammed Arkab has said that preparations for the holding of the 7th Summit of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum to be held in Algiers from February 29 to March 2nd are running smoothly. And scores of Palestinians have been killed in new Israeli bombardments that hit a kindergarten sheltering displaced people in the east of Rafah. And those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. Good afternoon. The Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has arrived in Libyan capital Tripoli in his capacity as the special envoy of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, carrying a written message to the President of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mr. Mohammed Yunus al-Manfi. Jamal Salmani tells us more.
The meeting was an opportunity to review the state of and prospects for the Algerian-Libyan relations and to pay tribute to the historical and brotherly ties and solidarity between the two countries and peoples. The two parties also discussed a number of regional and international issues of common concern, including the Palestinian cause, the developments of the situation prevailing in the besieged Gaza Strip, as well as the latest security and political developments in the Sahel-Sahara region. Regarding the situation in Libya, Mr. Attaf reiterated Algeria's willingness to contribute through its position within the Security Council in defending the concerns and priorities of the Libyan brothers, with the aim of speeding up the achievement of a Libyan solution able to put a definitive end to the crisis. The President of the Libyan Presidential Council instructed Mr. Attaf to convey his greetings and esteem to the President of the Republic, as well as his willingness to meet with him soon, in the hope of continuing together to coordinate in the best interests and aspirations of the two countries and their brotherly peoples. Later on, Mr. Attaf had talks with the head of management of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation in the Libyan Government of National Unity, Tahir al-Baour, as part of his work and visit to Libya in his capacity as Special Envoy of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. On the occasion, the two parties evoked the priorities of bilateral cooperation in the economic, political and social fields ahead of the upcoming bilateral meetings, notably the Grand Joint Committee. The two parties also discussed the latest developments on the Libyan scene as part of the political process for resolving the crisis under the aegis of the UN, as well as the efforts made by the African Union in favor of a Libyan national reconciliation.
And the Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Saeed Shangriha, has started an official visit to Saudi Arabia as the representative of the President of the Republic, Supreme Chief of the Armed Forces and Minister of Defense, Abdelmajid Tebboune. During his stay, he will attend the second edition of the World Defense Show 2024, which starts today and is expected to last 4 days. General Shangriha was welcomed at the International King Khalid Airport by the commander of the Saudi Royal Air Air Defense Forces, General Maziad bin Sulaiman Al Amro. During his stay, General Shangri Hao is accompanied by a military delegation, will visit structures of the Saudi Armed Forces and meet Saudi military officials to discuss means of strengthening bilateral cooperation. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and Energy and Mines Minister Mohamed Arkab has said that preparations for the holding of the 7th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum are running smoothly. Jamal Salmani tells us more.
In a statement to the press on the sidelines of the national meeting held under the motto Renewable Energies, Opportunities to Enshrine the Energy Transition, initiated by the Youth Higher Council, the Energy Minister added that everything will be done to ensure the success of the summit at all levels. Earlier, the Energy Minister said the government is totally committed to the 2035 Energy Transition Strategy. Mr. Arkab said the objective of the country's authorities within the framework of this action plan is to achieve a production power of 15,000 megawatts of electrical energy by 2035 through several photovoltaic plants located in different regions of the country. In her part, the Minister of Environment and Renewable Energies, Fazia Dahlab, said Algeria intends to develop its national energy strategy through the development and use of renewable energies in line with the decisions of the country's high authorities regarding energy transition, with the aim of establishing a strong economic development prototype. Let's recall that the state implemented a national development program of renewable energies with the aim of producing 15,000 megawatts of photovoltaic electric energy connected to the public electricity network distribution by 2035 and another 1,000 megawatts within the framework of local sustainable development.
And Communication Minister Mohamed Lagab has chaired the National Conference of Directors of the Algerian National and Regional Radio Channels. The details with Miriam Barshi.
On the occasion, Mr. Lagab said that the meeting brought together the ministry executive and the directors of local radio channels to ensure that the talks between the two sides were direct and frank in both directions, and this is following a series of meetings held by the ministry with the directors of public and private media bodies, during which a number of issues were discussed, including the schedule of programs dedicated to the holy fasting month of Ramadan and the sports media, among others. The minister added that the meeting comes after the promulgation of a new legal text governing the media sector, which need to be implemented, stressing that the public media must be the first to comply with. Mr. Lagab called on the local media to be the voice of the citizens.
The role of local radios or media is crucial in making the right of citizens to receive and impart information. The citizen wants to picture himself in the media when listening to the radio, watching TV, or reading a newspaper. He wants to be represented in the media and his voice heard.
The meeting is taking place on the eve of the World Radio Day, celebrating on the 13th of February, which Algeria will celebrate this year from the Tlemcen radio channel. For his part, the Director General of National Radio, Mohamed Baghali, has said that the regional meeting, which has now become a tradition, testifies the attachment and interest shown by the Algerian state to the national radio, citing the extension of broadcasting time for a number of local radio channels to 24 hours a day.
The directors of regional radio channels are called upon to broadcast on daily basis at least 758 programs. There are 11 radio channels that broadcast 24 hours a day. On the 13th of February, coinciding with the celebration of World Radio Day, the regional radio of Bouira will join the group. The number of radios broadcasting 17 hours a day is 2, and those broadcasting 13 hours is 53. The number of radios broadcasting in both national languages, Arabic and Tamazight, is 27 radios.
27 إذاعة.
The National Conference continued with a wide-ranging debate involving the directors of radio channels who warmly hailed the content of the meeting, expressing their concerns and proposals for the development and diversification of their programs and services with the aim of better meeting the listeners' expectations.
2:39 minutes Algeria's time. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and Algeria is taking part in the International Tourism Exchange Fair BIT Milan in Italy. The BIT is an important meeting which aims to bring together all stakeholders in the tourism sector and constitutes a space which brings together investors in the tourism sector and professionals to building business relationships. A space was reserved for the Algerian Pavilion to highlight the tourist, cultural and architectural diversity of the destination Algeria. Through this event, the Algerian tourism sector aims to highlight the value of Algeria's tourism assets and intensify contacts with foreign tourist operators and the media to ensure the coverage of Algeria's participation in this event. Let's know that the International Tourism Exchange Fair BIT is taking place in Italy until the 6th of February. And to the Middle East now, scores of Palestinians have been killed in new Israeli bombardments that hit a kindergarten sheltering displaced people east of Rafah in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. Mariam Barshi.
The news agency Wafa quoted medical sources as saying that scores of others wounded in the pounding carried out overnight by the Israeli army. The Israeli army pursued its bombardments of Khan Yunis and Rafah, where thousands of people had sought refuge fleeing the fighting taking place in the other parts of the Gaza Strip. Earlier, the Palestinian Foreign Ministry warned against the disastrous repercussions of a new offensive to be launched by the Israeli forces on Rafah and reiterated that an immediate ceasefire was the only means of protecting the civilian population. It said that by failing to force Israel to put an end to its action, the international community once again showed its incapacity to stop the attacks and to give access to humanitarian aid. The UN affirmed that 1.3 million out of the 2.4 million inhabitants of Gaza are massed in Rafah bordering Egypt. The Israeli bombardments targeting the Palestinian enclave for over 4 months have caused over 24,200 deaths, mainly women and children, and displaced hundreds of others.
And hundreds of Chicago public schools or CPS students have called on their city council to support a resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Students at more than 15 schools walked out of classes to call for ceasefire in Gaza, carrying signs saying "Stop killing kids" and chanting "City Council, you can't hide, we charge you with genocide."
All of us organizers are from very diverse backgrounds. You know, it's not just Arab students, it's not just, you know, like Americans. It's people from like all over the world, students united that care about justice. So yeah, and in terms of how students showed their opposition to what's happening in Gaza, you know, we were all standing up demanding a permanent ceasefire. All of the students that showed up to the walkouts and to the protest, we all feel for Gaza. We can't allow for our representatives to call themselves our representatives while not representing our voices any longer. So we demanded that our representatives sign on to the ceasefire resolution because it's the least that they could do. And so we focused mostly on calling for a permanent ceasefire because we agreed that this would be the first step towards Palestinian liberation.
Let's know that the CPS protest came in support of the proposed City Council resolution in Chicago calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. And the Platform for Peace has organized in Syria a protest in support of the Palestinian and Sahrawi peoples who are facing up to occupation. A member of the Association of Friendship with the Sahrawi people in Syria, Miguel Castro, said the following about the protests to our colleague Wahib Amiri.
Hoy domingo 4 de febrero de 2024.
Today, the 4th of February, the city of Seville is hosting a huge rally bringing together citizens, representatives of political parties, social organizations and unions to defend the right of freedom in the Sahrawi and Palestinian peoples and to support their right to live in peace and liberty. This citizen action is to denounce the genocidal governments of Morocco and Israel with the complicity of the United Nations, United States, France and Germany, who are members of the European Union, who remain silent in the face of this human tragedy. We, the civil society, feel the obligation to protest to stop this genocide. Seville and Andalusia are wearing the white, red and green colors to defend the right of these peoples to independence and liberty.
That was a statement of a member of the Associations of Friendship with the Sahrawi people, Miguel Castro. And to Yemen now, fresh airstrikes have been carried out by the U.S. and the United Kingdom against Houthi targets across Yemen in response to attacks launched by the group against trade ships transiting via the Red Sea. The Houthis have pledged to retaliate to the U.S.-UK attacks that targeted 36 sites in 13 regions under control. The Houthis have pursued their attacks in the Red Sea and in the Aden Gulf despite warnings by the two countries. A series of airstrikes have been carried out by the US and the UK have against the Iraqi-Syrian border region have killed 23 people. And President Hage Geingob of Namibia, aged 82, has passed away following the long illness. The prominent politician was appointed Prime Minister after Namibia recovered independence from the white minority-ruled South Africa in 1990. He also chaired the body that drafted Namibia's constitution. More recently, the late president supported South Africa's ICJ case against the Israeli occupying authorities, accused of committing genocide in Gaza. And to Latin America now, at least 50 people have so far died in forest fires which devastated the center and south of Chile. The fire broke out in the tourist region of Valparaiso, where the famous seaside resort of Vina del Mar and its beaches faced scorching temperatures. According to the Chilean Interior Minister Carolina Toa, the fires have devastated 43,000 hectares. Local sources stressed that the region never experienced such a situation, and a curfew has been imposed by the authorities to facilitate the fuel supply to the emergency services. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, 14 hours 46 minutes Algiers time, and time now for the headlines. Foreign Affairs Minister Ahmed Attaf has arrived in Tripoli carrying a message of President Abdelmajid Tebboune to the President of the Libyan Presidential Council, Mohamed Yunus al-Menfi. And Energy and Mines Minister Mohamed Arkab has said that preparations for the holding of the 7th Summit of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum to be held in Algeria are running smoothly. And scores of Palestinians have been killed in new Israeli bombardments that hit a kindergarten sheltering displaced people in the east of Rafah. That's it, dear listeners, for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to the international event of the week presented by Mohammed Khatal.
The international event of the week.
This week, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed to the 10 donor countries which suspended their financing of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees to reconsider their decision, saying that without funding, the prospects for UNRWA and for the millions of people were very gloomy. He made the statement ahead of a meeting in New York with representatives of the main donors of UNRWA to examine how to keep the agency's financing suspended amid a polemic over its alleged involvement in the October 7th attack. The UN chief affirmed that the issue was being investigated while warning that the current UNRWA funding will not allow the agency to meet all needs in February. He said that the humanitarian system was collapsing in Gaza and expressed deep concerns at the inhuman conditions faced by the 2.2 million people who are, as he put it, struggling to survive without any of the basics. Asked if the U.S. considered the main donor country and which says it expects fundamental changes at UNRWA could reconsider its decision and resume its funding, our political analyst from California, Hamoud Salhi, had this to say.
I think there is a point where the United States will have to reconsider its position towards Israel, particularly this current administration's. As we enter into the campaign for presidential and congressional elections, the current administration and the Democratic Party will have difficulty justifying its unconditional support for Israel. Already we see the vast majority of the American public is against this war. 80% in recent surveys show that Americans have real concerns about what's happening in Yemen, what's happening in Iraq, and what's happening in Syria, along with Gaza. Within the Democratic Party, the vast majority of the young, over 62%, are against Biden because of his policies or his approach of his support unconditionally of the Israelis in their occupation and constant violation of international human rights in Gaza. All of this will gives little leverage to the American president, particularly in areas in states where it will be close to call. The Arab Americans who represent the vast or a great significant number of votes in Michigan have already decided not to endorse his candidacy. Some African religious leaders known for their strong support to Biden have also are now on record for not possibly considering, will not supporting Biden in these upcoming elections. All of that suggests that President Biden, because of the internal pressure and because of his failure and the failure of Israel, of the atrocities that Israel is committing in Gaza, and his unconditional support, will have at one point or another consider that position, because it implicates him and it has a huge impact on the upcoming elections.
The UN Security Council's 15 members met this week at the request of Algeria to discuss the ruling issued by the International Court of Justice, ICJ, on the provisional measures to be taken by Israel to prevent a genocide in Gaza. Addressing the meeting, Algeria's representative Ammar Benjama hailed the historic nature of the ICJ's ruling that marks the beginning of the end of impunity for the Israeli occupying authorities. He called on the international community to see to it that Israel complies with the provisional measures called for by the ICJ, which he emphasized could only be implemented through a ceasefire. In similar moves, Japan's representative to the UN reiterated that the measures are binding for all the parties at a time when Russia's ambassador warned that the ongoing war in Gaza would but lead to a destabilization of the region, and urged Israel to immediately cease its indiscriminate attacks in Gaza and to stop hindering the aid deliveries. Would the ceasefire calls remain unheard at a time when the World Food Programme assures that famine was inevitable in Gaza? Our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
It is not expected that the United States will reverse course. The United States claims that is only halting funds, not cutting them altogether. But historically, that shows differently. The United States rushed to stop the funding, and with a dozen other countries joining it at this time and with no investigation, it can only be seen as another chapter or added to the other previous attack that it launched with Israel against UNRWA. UNRWA, as we know, was created in 1948 to protect Palestinians, and since then it has been attacked particularly by the United States and Israel, both on a record for their movement, for their attacks and against UNRWA. Also, it is important to note that the decision for the United States to act at this time and defund the organization came just after the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel committed genocide activities, and it's plausible to be looked into by the court. And in addition, United Nations Special Report noted that the decision by some states to defund a United Nations Refugees Organization is collectively punishing millions of Palestinians. Most likely, this decision violating their obligation under the Genocide Convention. It is in the context also that one would hope that other nations would step in. John Egeland, the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugees Council, said that it is high time for other states and organizations to step in and to donate to this organization because of what is at stake. It is very, very important that such funding be provided so that Palestinians are not left, or their suffering will not at least be partially relieved.
Progress was achieved as part of discussions held under Qatar's mediation and aimed at defining the terms of a framework for a second pause in the fighting in Gaza. The U.S. Secretary said he hoped the discussions would culminate in a truce. However, the Israeli Prime Minister ruled out the idea of a cessation of the ongoing military operations and the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu's plan to keep control of Gaza was also reiterated by several members of his cabinet, who openly spoke out this week in favor of a re-establishment of Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip. Asked on whether the U.S. would continue to support the security-based strategy ordered by the Israeli Prime Minister, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
There is no definite answer at this point, but it is important we place the International Court of Justice measure in an international legal context, one that has consequences on the Zionist state. The ICJ ruling offered a historical international reference and benchmarks that can be implemented with a ceasefire, or can only be implemented with a ceasefire. The 6 measures are clear indictment of Israel's violation of international law. And it shows clearly that Israel committed suicide and collective punishment. Moreover, the court's ruling is for Israel to report in a month about its activities. This is another indirect directive for Israel to stop the war. As an international legal institution, it should be noted that the court has no tool to implement its ruling. The question before it at this time, whether the crimes committed by Israel in Gaza amounts to genocide. And therefore, the court rightly did rule by saying that there is enough evidence for the court to look at it. A fact that appears to have lost in the narrative and the hope some created that it would, and therefore explain disappointments. What the court provided, therefore, is a legal evidence for other institutions like the United Nations Security Council, the United Nations General Assembly, and the states that compose the world community, to use its ruling as a justification to hold Israel accountable for international law. Algeria's calling for the United Nations Security Council to meet is in the right direction and is what is expected after the ICJ has taken such a ruling. So the question, will Israel continue to ignore ICJ court decision and not cease its genocide acts against Palestinians, becomes a matter of time. Mounting pressure on the United States throughout the world could force the United States to abstain or not use its veto right against any resolution that would hold Israel in violation of Palestinians' right. With this ICJ ruling, the United States now has to consider the impact of using its veto in world opinion and how that would further undermine its credibility in the world. Yes, the court may not have ruled directly that Israel has to stop, but it has given the tools for the Security Council, for the General Assembly, and for the world as a whole to act in that regard.
Let's recall that about 20 non-governmental organizations, including the Norwegian Refugee Council, Oxfam, and Save the Children, issued a joint statement this week in which they expressed deep concern and outrage at the donors' decision to suspend their financing of UNRWA, saying it will but worsen the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
استمعوا إلينا لنقل المعلومات من مصادر